So I'm next. To tell you the truth, I don't really want to tell this story. But this is what we're here for, so I'll endure it and tell it. Us nurses are professionals when it comes to caring for patients. That's why sometimes I get private requests for care too. This happened to one of my colleagues as well. She got a request to care for a young girl. She had been ill since she was young, and she was unable to leave the house. And even worse, both her parents died when she was young, so it was just her and her older brother. Her brother used to be a doctor, and apparently he moved them to the countryside so the fresh air could help her. I don't know the full details, but apparently the pay for this job was quite good as well. And so she decided to go. Yoko-chan, do you think she went because of the high pay? It kind of feels like that might be why. Well, that's a little disappointing. Nurses aren't like that at all. The most important thing is considering others and having a gentle heart. If you don't have that, then you can't be a nurse. The thought of money or receiving things in return basically doesn't exist in our minds. I think she felt the same way. But still, the first time she saw that house, her breath caught in her throat. She followed a twisting path you could barely call a path for 10 or 20 minutes through a deep forest, and at the end was a large mansion. It was a huge, splendid mansion, like you might see in a foreign film. The vines climbing the walls spoke of the pedigree of the house, and then the heavy door creaked open right in front of her astounded eyes. "Welcome. We've been waiting for you." Standing there was a tall man in his 30s wearing a black shirt. He looked down at her with dark, quiet eyes. You're here to take care of my sister, yes? Let me show you in right away." He smiled and the man led her inside. A thick curtain hung in the guest room with a tall ceiling, even though it was still only evening. Then she saw a beautiful girl sitting on the wine-red sofa. She had glossy black hair that sat in gentle curls that reached her shoulders. Above her white sleeping gown, she wore a large shawl, making her look like an adorable antique doll. Her light brown eyes turned to stare at her. "This is the nurse who's here to look after you," the young man said, and the girl fluttered her eyelids a few times and then lowered her head. Yet no words came from those cute lips. She thought this patient might be a little hard to deal with, but most patients are that way, aren't they? Unlike his cold younger sister, the young man smiled affably. "I'm Kyosuke. My sister is Sarasa. Our parents have both unfortunately passed, so it's just the two of us here. Please, make yourself at home." It was just the two of them in this house. For a moment, she thought that was strange, but she didn't hear all the details of their situation beforehand. Everyone has their own circumstances after all, right, Yoko-chan? Probably. Right, you understand how she felt, yes? She didn't want to make things awkward with her new boss. So, she was given one of the rooms on the second floor next to Sarasa-chan's room, and across from them was Kyosuke-san. She quickly put her things away and then made her way to Sarasa-chan's room. She knocked, but there was no response, so she quietly turned the doorknob. The door easily opened, and she saw something on the floor. She approached it to pick it up, and it was a headless doll covered in scratches. "What are you doing?" Suddenly, she heard a voice coming from behind her. It was adorable, like a bell ringing, but it was also cold, and there she saw Sarasa-chan standing behind her. "I'm sorry, the door was open." "Get out!" Sarasa-chan spat out before she could finish her sentence. Then she closed the door in her face. Finally, it was dinner time, so the three of them made their way to the dining room. She thought she might apologize for what had just happened, but Sarasa-chan moved her spoon around in her soup like she had no idea what she was talking about. There was nothing else she could do, so she started drinking her soup as well. But as she did, she felt something moving around inside her mouth, and before she could stop herself, she spat the soup back up. Something that looked like white rice crawled around on the white tablecloth. Maggots! Her face lost all color. "Are you okay?" Kyosuke-san ran over to her and rubbed her back. In the soup, there was..." She pointed at the table as she desperately tried to talk. The maggots that should have been right there had entirely disappeared. What's wrong?" Next thing she knew, Kyosuke-san was looking at her with a worried look on his face. "No, it's nothing. Sorry for disturbing you," she said earnestly as she broke out in goosebumps. She was just imagining it. That was what she told herself. "Well, if you say so, but if you don't feel well, then please tell me, okay?" Kyosuke-san said as he placed the main dish before her. It was one of those plates with a round silver dome over it, but as soon as she removed it, she stood up and screamed. There was a corpse of a black rat on the plate. A rat! Everyone turned to look at her as her eyes filled with tears. They stared at her blankly. "What's wrong?" They were both looking at her plate, but nothing about their complexion changed. What on earth was going on? Could they not see the rat? I think they were lying. That's what you would think, right? But she didn't even have time to think that herself. The smell of the corpse being kept warm on the plate reached her nostrils. Ugh! She couldn't stand it any longer, and she ran from the dining room. She ran up the stairs and into her own room, then went to dive under the covers. But then she realized there was a cat's head covered in blood on the sheets. Its half-open eyes seemed to glare at her. Yeah! She screamed and then passed out. In the darkness, she felt like she heard a voice, and so she turned around. There, a single face floated in the air. It was the creepy face of a wrinkled old woman with empty eye sockets.
Leave. Get out of here.
Right now." The old woman continued to mutter as though threatening her. She wanted to ask who she was, but the face started moving further away and then finally disappeared. When she came back to, she was lying on her bed with Kyosuke-san and Sarasa-chan looking down at her. She tried to sit up in a panic, but her body refused to listen. "A cat! The cat's—" "What about the cat?" Kyosuke-san asked, looking worried. She tried to tell him that there had been a cat's head on the bed, but then she hesitated. Do you know why? She didn't know whether it really happened or not. That's right. She wondered if maybe she had just dreamt it. "It's nothing," she said quietly, then bit her lip. Kyosuke-san furrowed his brow, like he felt bad for her. "You seem to be quite tired. You should rest," he said, and then he left the room with Sarasa-chan. As soon as the door closed, Sarasa-chan turned back to glare at her with a sharp gaze. It was so full of hatred, it was like she was trying to kill her through that alone. The door then closed, but she broke out in goosebumps. After all, she figured out who was harassing her with those hate-filled eyes. There was no doubt that Sarasa-chan hated her. But why? Because she didn't want to get better. Yes, that's what she thought too. Sarasa-chan didn't want to get better. If things stayed as they were, then she would be able to keep the kind Kyosuke-san's affection all to herself. And that thought made her angry. She had come to this mansion because she had been invited, and yet she was acting so selfishly. Anger breeds power, and although her body felt heavy, she suddenly sat right up. She had to voice her complaints, and so she opened the door. By the way, Yoko-chan, you remember the layout of the house as I explained it before, right? Which door could she see right across from her own? Sarasa. Oh my, no. Sarasa-chan's room was next to hers. That's why, first, she looked at the door next to her own, and it was pitch black inside, and there wasn't a single sound. Was she perhaps asleep? I think so. That's right. It was late at night, when children should be asleep. But then she noticed that the light to the room across from hers was on. She could also hear voices talking, so there was no doubt that Sarasa-chan was in Kyosuke-san's room. If she went to complain to Sarasa-chan now, then Kyosuke-san would hear it too. And that might make him upset with her. That was what she thought. But if it were you, Yoko-chan, would you go there right away? Of course. That's right. The same as her. She was really angry, and as she went to knock on the door, it opened. Sarasa-chan really was in there, her face pale as she sat on the bed. What's wrong? It's not good for you if you don't get any sleep. Kyosuke-san stood up from the chair in front of Sarasa-chan and walked over to her. He looked worried, and he gently put a hand on her shoulder. And whose fault do you think it is that I can't sleep? As she got angry, a sharp pain ran down her neck. She touched it in shock. She was bleeding. "What are you doing?" she yelled, and Kyosuke-san quickly held her down. "This is perfect. Okay, Sarasa." Sarasa-chan was trembling. She appeared to be afraid, but her eyes were steady and staring at her neck. That feverish, rapt gaze sent chills down her spine. "Sarasa, come." Kyosuke-san beckoned her closer. She stood and then approached, almost as though she were walking on clouds. Something was wrong, and warning bells went off inside her head. But it was too late. Kyosuke-san's grip on her arm was strong, and there was nothing she could do as a weak woman. Plus, even if she did run, her attacker knew the mansion like the back of his hand. She was at a massive disadvantage either way. Still, she calmly thought it over. One of the requirements for becoming a great nurse is to never, ever give up until the very end. But that rationality also disappeared at the end. That's right, the moment she saw Sarasa-chan's eyes glowing. Her scream cut off suddenly, and the mansion fell silent. It was a gloomy silence, like that of a graveyard. And a moment later, Sarasa-chan lifted her head. Reproachfully, she turned to look at Kyosuke-san beside her. "You're so mean, brother. I didn't want to do this again." "But you must, Sarasa. Your mother entrusted your care to me," Kyosuke-san said as he gently ruffled her hair. Sarasa-chan looked sadly at the now cold body of the new victim before her, meaning the nurse. A wound remained in her neck where Sarasa-chan had just sucked out her blood. "Brother, why am I different to you?" she muttered, almost crying, her voice in complete contrast to her almost shimmering beauty. "Yoko-chan, you've heard of vampires, right? They hate sunlight and they have to drink blood. Do you think they're just fiction? They don't just exist in faraway Europe, but old documents right here in Japan speak of a tribe that liked to drink blood. Of course, it's also thought that with the growth of trade, those legends were able to spread. But if that wasn't actually what happened, then how do you explain cases where people have died with all of their blood drained?" Maybe Sarasa-chan... No, I'm personally interested in these types of stories, so I know a little more than the average person. I'm not saying I have definitive proof, though. The nurse? She's still missing. She didn't have any family members, so there was nobody to look for her. She's probably buried in that deep forest somewhere where that mansion is. You want to know how I know this story, then? She comes to see me, you know. I think she wants somebody to find her body, and she knew that I could speak to ghosts, so she came to me as a colleague to ask me to find her body. But there's absolutely no way. Things could go terribly wrong if I actually found Sarasa-chan and her brother. But hey, if I change my mind on the matter, then maybe I'll go check it out for myself. I'm the type of person who often suffers because of my love for others. That's the end of my story. Who hasn't told theirs yet?